Don't buy her a ticket to the school concert. She can't hear well anyway, and it's an extra $20 we could spend on pizza afterward. The words didn't strike me. They seeped through the thin fabric of my housecoat, through my skin, and settled deep inside me, a cold, heavy crystal. I froze in the dim hallway, clutching a hanger that held the freshly ironed white concert dress for my granddaughter, Lily. The satin ribbon at the waist was still warm from the iron, and the air smelled of lavender starch, the scent of my care. It was my son, Mark, speaking on the phone with his wife, Jenna. He spoke quietly, matter-of-factly, as if discussing buying milk or filling up the car. He spoke about me as if I were a line item in their family budget, one that could be easily optimized. I didn't go out to them. I didn't make a scene, didn't cry. I simply turned and walked quietly, almost silently, to the guest room that had once been Lily's nursery. I slowly opened the door of the old wardrobe, inhaling the familiar scent of mothballs and dried verbena. Carefully, as if it were a crystal relic, I hung the dress on its hook. The white fabric vanished into the wardrobe's darkness, among things that hadn't been used in years. The click of the door sounded like a gunshot in the silence. From the living room, I could hear Mark's muffled laughter. He had finished his call and was now watching some evening show. That laugh, which I had loved so much, now seemed alien to me, a sound from another world to which I no longer had access. I returned to the living room, sat in my favorite armchair facing the silent television, and folded my hands in my lap. I just sat there, and inside me, layer by layer, the world I had spent 15 years building began to crumble. When Mark finally left, leaving behind a half-empty coffee cup and cookie crumbs on the kitchen table, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the red taillights of his car disappear into the darkness. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was deafening. It pressed in on me, demanding action, and my first action was simple. I took my son's dirty cup, walked to the sink, and began to wash it methodically, with a kind of cold fury. I scrubbed it with a sponge, washing away not just the brown coffee stain, but the invisible imprint of his presence, his words, his disregard. I washed every plate, wiped the table, and when the kitchen was perfectly clean again, I felt not relief, but only an icy void. I was erasing them as if they had never been there. Sitting at the immaculately clean table, I let the memories flood in. They came not chaotically, but with the clarity of evidence being presented at a trial that had suddenly convened in my mind. The first image to surface was of a dusty consignment shop 2 years ago. It smelled of old varnish and rosin. My piano, the one I'd played since I was 5, the one Mark and then Lily had learned on, stood in the middle of the room, foreign and lonely. Its ivory keys, yellowed by time and a million touches, remembered my mother's fingers. I remembered Mark's excited call. "Mom, Lily got into the summer music camp. This is her chance, but it costs $3,000. I didn't hesitate for a second. That same day, I sold a piece of my soul for $3,000. The man in the shop counted out the money in crisp bills. They felt so light, so worthless compared to the weight of the loss. "Thank you, Mom, you're the best," Lily had told me then. And today, the price of my love, of my presence, had plummeted to $20. That memory was followed by another, even older one. The kitchen table, buried in paperwork. It had only been 6 months since my husband Robert had passed away. His life insurance money, our untouchable nest egg for my old age, sat in a separate account. Robert and I had dreamed of a cruise to the Norwegian fjords when we retired. I even kept the glossy brochure in my drawer. But then my grandson Tom, the older one, had gotten serious about hockey. And not just serious, he was showing incredible promise. "Mom, he needs professional equipment," Mark had said, looking me in the eye. "This is his ticket to the big leagues. It's an investment in his future. Almost 15,000. I silently pulled the fjord brochure from the drawer, looked at the ship sailing between majestic cliffs, and then looked at a photo of Tom in his uniform. That week, I withdrew the money from the account. I invested in his future by giving up my past, our dream. And now, in this ringing silence, I suddenly saw everything with horrifying clarity. These weren't sacrifices, they were transactions. Every gesture of mine, every dollar given, every hour spent driving them to practice or rehearsal, it wasn't an act of love, but a service rendered, a service that had a price. And over the years, that price had depreciated. I felt like an option in an online order, one that could easily be declined to save a little money. The worst part wasn't that they begrudged the money. The worst part was that they never even considered that my joy might be worth the expense. In that moment, I understood that to them, I wasn't a spectator. I was just a seat in the hall. Whether it was empty or occupied didn't matter. I wasn't family. I was a resource, and my resources were being depleted. The thoughts stopped swirling. In their place came a cold, calm calculation. I went upstairs to Robert's study, which had remained almost untouched since the day he died. I opened the heavy drawer of his desk and took out a metal box. The key, as always, was in its place. Inside, among old letters and photographs, was a thick folder of documents. I found it the deed to this house, an instrument dated 40 years ago. The owners' names, Robert Gray and Sylvia Gray. After his death, I became the sole owner. I ran a finger over my name. This wasn't just ink on paper. This was my fortress, my only real investment. I went back downstairs, sat in my armchair, and picked up the phone. I found a number in my contacts I hadn't used in years. "Davis and Partners Financial Group," a polite voice answered. "Good evening," I said, my own voice sounding surprisingly steady and firm. "My name is Sylvia Gray. I would like to schedule a consultation with Mr. Davis. I need to discuss restructuring my assets. Specifically, the creation of an endowment and a charitable foundation." After a brief conversation, I hung up. Then I did one more thing. On the dresser by the door, I always kept my old opera glasses in their leather case. I took them to every concert, every play, to get a better view of my grandchildren's faces on stage. I picked them up, wiped the lenses with a soft cloth, and placed them on the mantelpiece, next to the photos of Mark, Lily, and Tom. But I placed them so they weren't aimed at the photos, but looked out the window, toward the dark street, toward the world beyond this house. That night, I realized I hadn't lost a family. I had simply finally seen its true price, and I decided I could no longer afford it. The offices of Davis and Partners were a world away from the emotional chaos of my kitchen. The air here was cool and smelled of expensive leather and paper. Filtered sunlight slanted through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in perfect silence. There was no clutter, only the cold architecture of finance and law, a place where feelings were converted into clauses and assets. I sat in a heavy leather chair across from a polished mahogany desk, and for the first time in days, my breathing was even. Mr. Davis, a man with silver hair and eyes that had seen every kind of human drama distilled into a balance sheet, looked at me over his spectacles. "Mrs. Gray," he began, his voice calm and measured, "you mentioned on the phone that you wished to restructure your assets." I met his gaze without flinching. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and firm. I want to establish an endowment in my name, the Sylvia Gray Scholarship for Young Musicians, and I want to amend my last will and testament to make it the primary beneficiary. That first meeting set the checklist in motion. My life, which had felt like a crumbling ruin, was now a restoration project. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was a methodical, necessary repair. The following Tuesday was dedicated to the legal restoration. I spent 3 hours with Mr. Davis and his legal team, dismantling the architecture of my old life, brick by brick. I watched as they drafted the charter for the foundation, their pens gliding across thick paper, filling it with words like perpetuity, fiduciary duty, and governing board. Then came the will. The old one, which left everything the house, the savings, Robert's investments to Mark, to be managed for the grandchildren, was brought out. Mr. Davis slid a new document in front of me. I read it once, then again. My signature at the bottom felt heavier than any I had ever made. The ink was a verdict. I was no longer a resource to be managed. I was a legacy to be built. Wednesday was for the financial restoration. The bank branch was bright and impersonal, the marble floor cool under my feet. I walked past the long queue and sat at a private client desk. The young woman who helped me was polite and efficient. I need to make some changes to my accounts, I said, sliding my ID across the desk. First, I'd like to remove authorized user access for Mark Gray from my primary savings and checking accounts. As she typed, a sudden sharp memory pierced through my resolve. Mark, 16 years old, standing at this very counter, his face beaming as I co-signed to open his first checking account. He'd been so proud, so full of promises about being responsible. The memory was warm, but it now carried the sting of betrayal. The clerk looked up. "That's done, Mrs. Gray. Anything else?" I took a breath. "Yes, I'd like to transfer $10,000 from my savings. It's the initial deposit for an endowment." The click of her keyboard was the sound of a door locking. Before leaving the bank, I performed a small, vital ritual. I changed my online banking password from LilyTom2005 to a complex, unguessable string of characters. I felt a quiet satisfaction as I did it, a digital severance of a tie that had become a chain. That afternoon, I tended to my roses. The methodical work of pruning was a balm. I snipped away the dead canes and withered blooms, my shears making a satisfying thwack with each cut. A thorn pricked my finger, and I watched a single drop of blood well up, dark red, against my skin. It was a small pain, a real one, and it felt grounding. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, waved from her yard. "Your roses look beautiful this year, Sylvia," she called out. I smiled back, a genuine smile. "Thank you, Eleanor. It just needed a bit of clearing out." It was a simple, warm exchange, a reminder that the world outside my family was still there, still kind. The physical restoration took place on Friday. I hired a locksmith, a young man with kind eyes and capable hands. He worked quietly, efficiently, replacing the old locks on my front and back doors. "Just want to feel a bit more secure," I explained, though he hadn't asked. He nodded. "Smartest thing you can do," he said. "Peace of mind is worth a lot." He handed me 2 new, shiny keys. They felt solid and unfamiliar in my palm. As he left, he turned and said, "You take care now, Mrs. Gray." It was a small courtesy, but it resonated deeply. Later that evening, a technician installed a simple security system. The small, blinking green light on the panel by the door was a silent guardian, a symbol of a boundary reestablished. My home was mine again, completely. That night, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. I didn't recognize the number, but I pressed play. It was Mark. His voice was laced with a carefully constructed panic. "Mom? Mom, where are you? I've been trying to call." I drove by the house and the lights are off. We're worried sick. Please, just call me back and let me know you're okay." I listened to the message twice, my face impassive. He wasn't worried. He was unsettled. He had lost access, and the withdrawal of a resource had triggered an alarm. He didn't ask if I was happy or well. He asked where I was. It was a question of logistics, not love. Without a flicker of emotion, I pressed the 7 key. Message deleted. The weekend was for the final, symbolic restoration. I spent Saturday morning in the attic, going through boxes of memories. I didn't throw anything away. Instead, I sorted. Photographs of the grandchildren's birthdays, their school reports, the little crayon drawing of a house Lily had made for me, they all went into a large archival box. With a black marker, I wrote a single word on the side: history. I wasn't erasing my past. I was filing it away. Then, I found my old address book. I turned to the G section and found Mark and Jenna's entry. I picked up a pen and drew a single, thick, deliberate black line through their names and address. Finally, I sat down with a cup of tea and a new travel magazine. I found the section on Scandinavian cruises. I slowly, carefully, tore out the page, featuring a ship gliding through a majestic Norwegian fjord. I pinned it to the corkboard in my kitchen, right where the children's sports schedules used to hang. On my way home from the grocery store on Sunday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I stopped at the Gilded Spoon, a little French patisserie I used to love. The bell above the door chimed, and the air was thick with the scent of butter and sugar. I bought a single perfect slice of lemon tart. I didn't take it home. I sat at a small table by the window, the late afternoon sun warming my face, and ate it slowly, savoring every bite. It was a small, quiet celebration. It was the first payment from a new investment, an investment in myself. The insistent knocking on the front door began on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun was filtering through the kitchen window, illuminating the steam rising from my teacup. It was Mark. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know. The rhythm of his knock, impatient, then hesitant, then demanding, was as familiar as his voice. I heard the scrape of his key in the new lock, followed by a frustrated jiggle of the doorknob. Silence. Then his voice, muffled by the thick oak door. "Mom, are you in there? The key isn't working. Mom, open the door." I took a slow sip of my tea. The warmth of the porcelain was a comforting anchor in the sudden storm outside. He called my name again, his tone shifting from confusion to the sharp edge of annoyance. I simply sat at my kitchen table, listening. My mother used to say, "If they won't listen to your words, make them listen to your silence." And in that moment, the silence of the house was louder than any argument I could ever have made. When the knocking finally ceased and the sound of his car faded away, a profound stillness settled over the house. It was a house no longer filled with the echoes of expectation, but with the quiet hum of memory. I decided it was time for an inventory. I began my slow walk through the rooms, a final tour of my own personal museum. I started in the living room, standing before Robert's worn leather armchair. The warm memory came first. Mark as a little boy, curled up in that very chair, fast asleep on his father's chest after a long day of playing in the yard. The faint scent of old leather and pipe tobacco still clung to the fabric. Then came the cold memory, sharp and clear. Mark, a grown man, standing in this same spot just a few months ago, casually saying, "We should probably sell this chair, Mom. It's taking up a lot of space." He hadn't seen a memory. He had seen an inconvenience. I moved to the small bedroom upstairs that had once been the grandchildren's playroom. I ran my hand over the wall where a faint pencil mark still showed Tom's height at age 6. I could almost hear the sound of their laughter, the clatter of building blocks, the stories I used to read them before bed. It was a warm, sweet ache, but it was followed by the chill of a more recent memory. Jenna, standing in the doorway, phone in hand, saying, "We should really repaint this room, turn it into a proper guest room. It looks so dated." The room wasn't a sanctuary of childhood to her. It was underutilized real estate. My final stop was the piano, or rather, the empty space where it used to be. The wood floor was lighter there, a pale ghost of the instrument that had filled this house with music for 60 years. I remembered teaching Lily her first scales, her tiny fingers struggling to press the keys. The pure, simple joy on her face when she played her first complete song was a memory so warm it almost brought tears to my eyes. But it was immediately eclipsed by the cold, transactional memory of the consignment shop, of trading that joy for a check that paid for a summer camp ticket, which in turn led to a conversation about a $20 concert ticket. The exchange rate of my love had been calculated, and the result was bankruptcy. The walk was over. The inventory was complete. I understood now that I wasn't mourning the family I had lost, but the family I had always imagined I had. The two were not the same. I returned to the kitchen, took a fresh notepad and a pen from the drawer, and sat down at the table. I made 2 lists. Under the heading "To Leave," I wrote, the heavy furniture, the excess dishes, the weight of expectation, the ghosts. Under the heading "To Take," my list was much shorter. My books, Robert's letters, the opera glasses, my future. The act of writing it down was a final, quiet, severing. The next day, I began to pack. It wasn't the frantic, chaotic packing of someone fleeing, but the deliberate, meditative packing of someone moving toward something. I started with the most important things. I went to Robert's study and took down the metal box containing his letters. I didn't reread them. I knew them by heart. I wrapped the box in a soft cashmere scarf, his favorite, and placed it gently into a small, sturdy cardboard box. Then came my collection of classical music scores, their spines cracked and pages filled with my handwritten notes. They went into another box, each one a conversation with a composer I'd known my whole life. Finally, I took the opera glasses from the mantelpiece. I polished the lenses one last time and placed them in their worn leather case. This was not just a collection of objects. It was the curated essence of my life, the parts that belonged only to me. I sealed each box with tape and, with my black marker, wrote a single word on the side of each one, mine. When the last box was sealed, I stood in the middle of the living room and looked around. The house felt different. The quiet was no longer the oppressive silence of absence, but the peaceful emptiness of a space cleared and ready. It was no longer haunted. It was simply a house, ready for new stories, stories that would be written without me. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, forward momentum. The boxes labeled mine sat neatly stacked in the hallway, monuments to a decision made. My mornings were no longer spent waiting for a phone call that might or might not come. Instead, I sat on my front porch, a mug of coffee warming my hands, and simply watched the world wake up. I was no longer a supporting character waiting for my cue. I was the audience, the director, and the lead actor in my own life. On Thursday, I made the call. It was to a realtor who specialized in downtown apartments with city views. Something small, I told her, with a lot of natural light and a balcony big enough for 2 chairs. The call was short, efficient, and left me with a feeling of exhilarating purpose. Later, while pruning the last of the fading summer roses in the garden, I found myself thinking of Mark. I realized I didn't miss him, the preoccupied, dismissive man he had become. I missed the idea of him. I missed the memory of a small boy who thought his mother was the strongest, smartest person in the world. And I understood that mourning an idea is far easier than trying to resurrect a reality that no longer exists. The unexpected call came on a rainy Saturday afternoon. The house was filled with the gentle patter of rain against the window panes and the scent of old books as I sorted through Robert's library. The phone rang, and I glanced at the caller ID. It was Lily's number. For a moment, I hesitated, my newfound peace suddenly fragile. I answered, but said nothing. "Grandma?" Her voice was small, tentative. "It's me, Lily." A long pause filled the line, punctuated only by the sound of her shaky breath. I wanted to say I'm sorry. The words were barely a whisper. I remained silent, not out of anger, but because the apology felt incomplete, a pebble tossed into a canyon. I needed to hear it land. "For what exactly are you sorry, Lily?" I asked, my voice gentle but firm. There was another pause, longer this time. I could hear her struggling. For the concert ticket?" she finally said, her voice cracking. "I heard what Dad said. I was in my room, and I didn't say anything. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you." That was it, the truth. Not a vague, placating apology, but a specific, painful admission. It was the sound of the pebble hitting the bottom of the canyon. "Thank you for telling me that," I said, my own voice softer now. "That means a great deal." We spoke for a few more minutes, the conversation awkward but honest. Before we hung up, I made an offer. "I'd like to see you, Lily, but just you. Could you come for tea on Tuesday?" Her relief was audible. "Yes, Grandma, I'd love that." When Lily arrived, the rain had stopped, leaving the world outside washed clean and glistening. She stood on the doorstep, looking small and uncertain, clutching a small box of cookies from the local bakery. I didn't hug her immediately. Instead, I smiled and stepped back to let her in. The atmosphere in the living room was polite, a little fragile. I served the tea in my best china cups, the ones reserved for special occasions, and placed her cookies on a plate between us. For a while, we talked about small things, her school, her music. Then, she looked down at her hands. "I don't know why I didn't say anything," she confessed. "I guess I just go along with what they say. It's easier." I watched her, not with disappointment, but with a sad understanding. "You wanted to belong," I said softly. "Sometimes, when we're afraid of being left out, we agree to rules that hurt other people. And sometimes, we hurt ourselves." She looked up, her eyes wide with recognition. She understood. As she was getting ready to leave, she turned to me, her expression full of hope. Can I come again, Grandma?" It was the question I had been waiting for. This was the moment where the old patterns could either be broken or reinforced. "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze directly. "You can always come here, but not for my approval, or because you feel guilty, or because you think you should. You come here for an honest conversation. That's the only thing I have to offer now." I walked her to the door and, as a final gesture, took one of the cookies she had brought and wrapped it in a napkin for her. "For the road," I said. It wasn't a return to the old ways of me providing everything. It was an acknowledgement of her offering. A small, shared step onto new, healthier ground. Watching her walk down the path, I felt a shift inside me. The solid wall I had built around my heart hadn't crumbled, but a small fissure had appeared a crack. It wasn't a weakness. It was a window. I realized that some doors don't need to be bolted shut forever. Sometimes, it's enough to simply lock them quietly from the inside, leaving a window slightly ajar. Not for everyone. just for the ones who learn to knock gently and who are willing to come inside alone. The day I signed the lease was crisp and clear, the kind of early autumn day that feels like a fresh start. For the occasion, I chose my navy blue silk blouse, the one Robert always said made my eyes look like the deep sea in a simple pair of trousers. The clothes felt less like an outfit and more like armor, tailored for the woman I was becoming. The apartment was on the 7th floor of a well-maintained building overlooking the city park. The realtor, a kind woman named Sarah, unlocked the door and stepped aside. The moment I walked in, I knew. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Sunlight poured through floor to ceiling windows, flooding the empty living room with a clean, uncompromising light. The floors were polished hardwood, reflecting the blue sky outside. I walked to the balcony, the sound of my sensible shoes echoing in the empty space. Leaning on the railing, I looked down at the miniature world below, people walking their dogs, children playing, the entire vibrant, anonymous life of the city unfolding before me. There was no history here, no ghosts in the corners, no faint pencil marks on the walls. It was a blank page. "I'll take it," I said to Sarah, not looking back. My voice was steady, the decision instantaneous and absolute. Back in her office, a sterile space that smelled of leather and printer ink, I signed the documents. My signature, which once felt so heavy when amending my will, now felt light, effortless. As Sarah handed me the keys, I took out my old, worn keychain, the one with a tiny silver grand piano charm, and removed all the old keys, leaving only the one for my car. Then I slid the 2 new, gleaming apartment keys onto the ring. The little piano now had a new house to guard. Before returning home, I stopped at the community garden a few blocks from my old house. I spent an hour there, my hands deep in the cool, dark earth, planting daffodil bulbs in my designated plot. It was a simple, grounding act. These bulbs would sleep through the winter, unseen and unknown, and emerge in the spring, a quiet explosion of yellow in a world made new. As I worked, I thought about the final tasks that remained. The packing was nearly done. Just yesterday, I had carefully wrapped my mother's china tea set, each cup a vessel of memories afternoons spent listening to her stories, the familiar warmth of her hands around mine. Placing it in a box labeled Legacy, I realized I wasn't just packing porcelain. I was preserving the lineage of love that had existed long before my own family's fractures began. He came that evening. I heard his car pull into the driveway and his hesitant footsteps on the porch. The knock was different this time, soft, uncertain. It was Mark. I was in the living room, surrounded by boxes, and I did not move. "Mom?" His voice was thin, strained against the wood of the door. "Mom, please. I know you're in there. Lily told me she saw you. Can we just talk?" I closed my eyes, picturing him on the other side. "There is nothing to talk about, Mark," I said, my voice calm and carrying easily through the silent house. "But I've been so worried. We all have been," he insisted, his voice rising with a familiar note of manufactured grievance. "You weren't worried, Mark," I replied, my tone flat, factual. "You were inconvenienced. There is a difference." There was a long silence. Then, a sigh of frustration. "Look, I'm sorry if we upset you. Jenna and we're under a lot of pressure. You know how at Island sometimes we say things?" I cut him off. "It wasn't something you said. It was something you valued. You valued my presence at $20. The numbers don't lie." Another silence, heavier this time. "What do you want me to do?" he finally asked, his voice cracking with defeat. "I want you to leave, Mark," I said softly. I heard his sharp intake of breath, then the sound of his footsteps retreating down the path. After the sound of his car faded, the dam broke. It wasn't a storm of grief, but a quiet, cleansing rain. I sat on the floor, leaned my head against a box labeled kitchen, and cried for exactly 7 minutes. I cried for the little boy who loved my stories, for the young man who was once so proud of his first checking account, and for the stranger on my porch who couldn't understand the currency of love. The tears weren't for the future I was losing, but for the past I had finally allowed myself to bury. When it was over, I felt empty, but it was a clean, peaceful emptiness. The next day, my new family came to me. Eleanor Gable from next door, and my old friend from the library, Martha. They arrived with a thermos of hot tea and a plate of scones, their presence a warm blanket in the cool, box-filled room. We didn't talk about Mark or Jenna. Instead, Eleanor told a hilarious story about a rogue squirrel that had been stealing her prize-winning tomatoes, and Martha described the plot of a ludicrous mystery novel she was reading. Their laughter was a gentle, healing sound. It was in the middle of this easy comfort that I told them, "I'm moving," I said simply. "I've found a lovely apartment downtown." There was no shock, no judgment. Eleanor reached over and squeezed my hand. "Oh, Sylvia, that's wonderful. You deserve a change of scenery." Martha nodded, her eyes bright with approval. "Closer to the symphony hall, I hope?" she asked with a grin. Their reaction was a gift, a reflection of the support I had craved, and now, finally, had found. They saw my decision not as a retreat, but as an advancement. Jenna arrived 2 days later. She didn't knock. She used the emergency key I'd given her years ago, one I had forgotten to retrieve, and let herself in, her heels clicking with proprietary confidence on the hardwood floor. She stopped short in the entryway, her eyes widening at the sight of the packed boxes. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, her face a mask of controlled fury. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the quiet. "What have you done?" "I am moving, Jenna," I said calmly from my armchair, not bothering to stand. "Moving? Without telling us? After everything we've done for you?" The first manipulation, guilt. I met her gaze. "Let's be precise. This is not about what you've done for me. It's about what you've done to me, or rather, what you've valued me at." Her face hardened. "This is ridiculous. You're punishing the children because your feelings were hurt over a silly comment." The second manipulation, using the children as a shield. "My feelings weren't hurt, Jenna," I corrected her gently. "My worth was calculated, and I've decided to invest my assets elsewhere. My presence, my support, my love, they're now being directed to the Sylvia Gray Scholarship, a place where they will be considered priceless." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't be serious. You would choose strangers over your own family? After all the years Mark has supported you, made sure you were taken care of?" The third manipulation, rewriting history. That was the moment. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I leaned forward slightly. "Mark hasn't supported me, Jenna. I have supported him. I sold my piano to send Lily to camp. I used my husband's life insurance money for my own old age to fund Tom's hockey career. My entire life has been a series of transactions to fund your ambitions. The difference is, I thought I was investing in a family. You thought you were managing a resource." She was speechless, her mask of indignation crumbling to reveal the raw panic underneath. "You'll be all alone," she finally spat, the words a desperate, cruel curse. "You'll die in that apartment all by yourself." I smiled, a small, sad, but completely serene smile. "No, Jenna," I said, delivering the final word. "I won't be alone. I'll be by myself." I stood up and walked to the small table by the door. I picked up a crisp white envelope and held it out to her. It was from the locksmith. A bill, addressed to her and Mark, for the cost of changing the locks. "I believe this is yours," I said. It was the final transaction. She stared at the envelope, then at me, her face a mixture of disbelief and defeat. She snatched it from my hand without a word, turned, and walked out. Her posture was no longer confident. It was the stoop of someone who had just lost a war they didn't even know they were fighting. The door closed behind her, the click echoing in the quiet room. I didn't feel joy or sadness. I felt only stillness, but this time, it was not the stillness of loneliness. It was the stillness of sovereignty. The final punctuation mark on my old life arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of an email. It was from Mr. Davis, a formal confirmation that the Sylvia Gray Scholarship for Young Musicians had been officially endowed and that the final transfer of assets was complete. The last line of his message read, "Congratulations, Mrs. Gray. As of this morning, you are the sole decision-maker in every inch of your life." I read the sentence 3 times, letting the weight and wonder of it settle into my bones. Sovereignty. It had a clean, solid sound. That afternoon, I made one last trip to the old neighborhood post office. I walked up to the counter and handed the clerk the keys to the post office box I had shared with Mark for years, the one where mail for both households was delivered. "I'm closing this box," I said. The clerk nodded, processed the request, and handed me a receipt. Walking out into the bright afternoon, I felt a lightness in my step. I had untethered the last anchor. Lily came to the old house one last time, on the day before the movers were scheduled. The living room was an echo chamber of boxes and memories. We didn't try to fill the space with chatter. Instead, we sat on the floor with a bag of simple chocolate chip cookies and a thermos of tea, the way you might on a picnic. The awkwardness from her previous visit had dissolved, replaced by a comfortable, quiet understanding. "Dad's really angry," she said, not looking at me, her voice small. "He says you've abandoned the family." I took a sip of tea before answering. The warmth, a small comfort. "He's not angry that I've left, Lily," I said gently. "He's angry that the person he thought I was has left, the person who existed to serve, to provide, to applaud. He is mourning the loss of a function, not a person. And you can't abandon a role you never truly signed up for." She seemed to absorb this, her young face a mixture of sadness and dawning comprehension. Before she left, she shyly handed me a small, clumsily wrapped package. "I made this for you," she mumbled. I carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a small, framed watercolor painting. It was a picture of my old opera glasses, but instead of being pointed at a distant stage, they were sitting on a windowsill, aimed up at a brilliant, star-filled night sky. It was a portrait of my newfound freedom, seen through her eyes. It was the most beautiful gift I had ever received. A lump formed in my throat. "Oh, Lily," I whispered. "It's perfect." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not just my granddaughter, but a young woman learning the difficult language of truth. "I will find the most special place for this in my new home," I promised, and I meant it. The morning of the move was shrouded in a soft, pearlescent mist. The house was empty, stripped of its personality, its rooms now just hollow, geometric shapes. I walked through it one last time, my footsteps echoing on the bare floors. I ran my hand along the smooth oak of the banister, remembering the countless times I had steadied myself on it. I stood in the empty space where my piano once sat, and could almost hear the faint notes of a Chopin nocturne. I touched the cool glass of the kitchen window where I had stood and watched my son's taillights disappear into the night. There was no pain in these final goodbyes, only a deep, quiet gratitude for the lessons the house had taught me. On the clean kitchen counter, I left the original front door key and a simple, handwritten note on a piece of cream-colored stationery. It read, "Thank you for the shelter. May you be filled with happier stories now." I walked out, closed the door behind me, and did not look back. My new building greeted me with the smell of fresh coffee from the lobby cafe and the warm smile of the concierge, a man named George. "Welcome home, Mrs. Gray," he said, handing me a small potted orchid. A little something from the building management. The movers were efficient and respectful, their cheerful chatter a welcome sound in my new, empty apartment. As they brought in the last of my boxes, I was left alone in the sun-drenched space. The first box I opened was the one labeled kitchen. I took out my electric kettle, filled it with water, and plugged it in. The familiar rumble as it came to a boil was the first true sound of home. The second thing I unpacked was Lily's painting. I placed it on the mantelpiece above the modern, clean-lined fireplace. It was the first piece of art on my new walls, a testament to a bond reforged on honest terms. The final item I retrieved was from the box labeled Legacy. I unwrapped Robert's favorite cashmere scarf and draped it over the back of what would be my reading chair. Its faint scent of his pipe tobacco and the familiar soft texture were a comforting presence, a blessing from the past for the future I was building. A week later, a new rhythm had established itself. One evening, while sorting through the box of Robert's letters, I found a short note he had tucked into a book years ago. I had forgotten it was there. It was from a time I had been hesitating about leaving my teaching job to pursue a different path. "My dear Sylvia," it read, "never be afraid to compose a new piece. Your life is not a single finished symphony. It is a collection of beautiful movements. Begin the next one whenever you are ready." Tears welled in my eyes. It felt as though he were right there, giving me his blessing. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done just for myself in decades. I baked a loaf of sourdough bread. The process was a meditation, the feeding of the starter, the slow kneading of the dough, the patient waiting as it rose. The smell of fresh bread filled my small apartment, a scent not of obligation but of pure, simple creation. Lily came to visit that afternoon. She now came every Saturday, a quiet, unspoken tradition. We didn't do much. Today, we sat on my new balcony, eating thick slices of my warm bread with butter and jam, and worked on a crossword puzzle together. She told me about fixing her bicycle, asking my advice on how to patch a tire, and I told her about the book I was reading. It was easy. It was real. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the city, she looked out at the view, a pensive expression on her face. "Is this peace, Grandma?" she asked quietly. I thought for a moment, watching the distant lights of the city begin to twinkle on. "Not all of it," I answered, my voice full of a quiet certainty. "But it is a piece of it, a very important piece, and it is mine. I never missed the big house. I never missed the silence of Mark's unmet expectations or the brittle smiles of Jenna's passive aggression. I did not miss the version of myself who used to whisper, 'Maybe next time they will see you,' because now I saw myself, and I no longer needed anyone else's permission to exist. They say a house is just walls and a roof, but for most of my life, mine was a container. It held memories, yes, but it also held expectations, resentments, and the ghosts of unspoken obligations. It was a vessel I was meant to maintain for others. The phone call from the realtor confirming its sale felt less like an ending and more like the moment a ship, finally unmoored, slips its last rope and turns its bow toward the open sea. There was no pang of loss, no nostalgic ache, I had already mourned the house, or rather, what it represented. The woman who answered that call was not the same one who had stood weeping in its silent kitchen. This was a quiet, logistical confirmation of a freedom already claimed. The next day, I walked into the downtown office of the Sylvia Gray Scholarship for Young Musicians. It was a small, vibrant space filled with the faint sound of a piano being practiced in a nearby room. The director, a warm woman named Miss Anya Sharma, greeted me with a respectful smile. I didn't hand her a check. I handed her the finalized legal documents, the deed of transfer that turned decades of mortgage payments and property taxes into a promise. "Mrs. Gray," she said, her voice full of emotion. This is generational. You are changing the future for so many." I looked past her, through the window, at the bustling city street. "This isn't for the future," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "This is for the quiet ones, the ones who practice in borrowed rooms and on silent keyboards. This is for the music that almost wasn't heard. My tears had been shed long ago for a different reason in a different life. This was not grief. This was intention." My new apartment, once a blank canvas, was now becoming a home. More than that, it was becoming a sanctuary. Lily continued her Saturday visits, each one a quiet affirmation of our rebuilt trust. One afternoon, she arrived with a small cardboard box tucked under her arm. "Can I leave this here, Grandma?" she asked, her eyes downcast. It's my sketchbook." "The new one. Mom says I should be focusing on my college applications, not doodling." She didn't need to say more. I understood. Her art, her private world, was being reclassified as an unproductive use of time, a liability on the family's balance sheet of success. I took the box from her. It felt surprisingly heavy, full of her fragile, unspoken dreams. "Of course, you can," I said, placing it on the top shelf of my bookshelf next to Robert's letters. "It will be safe here." We sat on the balcony, watching the rain begin to fall, a silver curtain over the city. "Do you think they'll ever change?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I considered the question, the weight of its hope and its futility. "I think that's the wrong question, my dear," I finally said. "It's not about whether they can change. It's about whether they can ever stop pretending. Pretending that control is a form of love, that expectation is a form of support. Some people build their entire world on those pretenses. To let them go would be to watch their world collapse." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and we watched the rain together in a comfortable shared silence. When she left, the sketchbook remained, a silent treaty between us, a symbol of the safe harbor I had finally built, not just for myself, but for the parts of my family that were still worth saving. A letter arrived a week later. The handwriting on the envelope was Mark's. I recognized the impatient slant of his script instantly. I left it on my entryway table for a full day, letting it exist in my space without granting it the power to disturb my peace. The next morning, with a cup of coffee in hand, I slid it open. The letter was short, a messy scrawl of confusion and a clumsy attempt at remorse. He wrote that he didn't understand what had happened, that the house being sold felt like a final, incomprehensible blow. He wrote that he was sorry. He wrote that he missed his mother. I read the words slowly, dispassionately. I could feel the genuine pain in them, but it was the pain of a man who had lost a landmark, not a person. He missed the version of me that had made his life easier. It was a letter written to a ghost. I felt a flicker of pity, but no anger, no resentment. I folded the letter, slid it back into its envelope, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, among old receipts and expired warranties. It would exist there, a filed-away piece of history, but it would not be answered. It no longer required a response. My 76th birthday began with silence. A blessed, beautiful, intentional silence. There were no forced, early morning phone calls, no passive-aggressive bouquets sent out of obligation, no heavy expectation of a family dinner I was required to host. I woke with the sun, made myself a perfect cup of coffee, and ate a single delicious croissant I'd bought the day before from the French patisserie. It was a feast for one, and it was perfect. Lily arrived at noon. She didn't bring an expensive store-bought gift. She brought a single, perfect gardenia from her own small window box and a handmade card. On the front, she had drawn a picture of a sturdy, ancient tree with deep roots, and on the inside, she had written, "Happy birthday, Grandma. Thank you for showing me what it looks like to stand tall." Her gift was not an object. It was a reflection of what I had become in her eyes. We spent the afternoon talking about her plans, not for the college her parents wanted, but for the art program she secretly dreamed of. She was finding her own voice, inspired by the sound of mine. As she was leaving, she paused at the door and smiled. "You seem different, Grandma," she said. "Happier, like a person who doesn't flinch anymore." My days now followed a new, gentler rhythm. I spent my mornings reading on the balcony, my orchid basking in the sun beside me. The plant, once a stranger's welcome gift, was now thriving, a testament to patient care. In the afternoons, I would often meet Eleanor and Martha for tea, our conversations a comfortable tapestry of shared stories and easy laughter. My home was no longer a silent stage for family drama, but a warm, vibrant space filled with the sounds of friendship and jazz from my small radio. Occasionally, a text message would arrive from an unknown number. "Happy birthday, thinking of you." I would read them, and then, without anger, without ceremony, I would simply delete them. They were echoes from a room I had already left. That night, before sleeping, I opened my journal. The first page, written months ago in the old house, was full of frantic, pained questions. The last page, this page, was for the answers. I wrote, they asked, in their actions and their silence, why I was still here, why I took up space. They priced my presence and found it lacking. Tonight, I finally have the answer. I am here to know my own name. I am here to set my own table. And I am here to hold the door open, just a little, for those who learn to knock with clean hands.